Hey everybody, welcome to our monthly meeting. We're doing it a little bit different this time for obvious reasons, but we're thrilled, and I'm personally so honored to have by far the best professor that I ever had at Harvard Business School, somebody who who really showed me what it was to be a business leader who makes a difference in the world. To be able to have Professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter here at Shorelight to talk to all of us. And I think many people know that Rosabeth is a mentor of mine and a dear friend. So I will call her Rosabeth. So Rosabeth, we have 650 people in the company all over the world, as you know. For some, because of the timing, this might be a little late. They might be watching this on video, but I believe we'll have about half the company tuning into this, and we're so grateful that you could be here today. In my experience, and for any of you who are familiar with Rosabeth's groundbreaking work, each book that Rosabeth has written throughout her career has taken another step in helping business leaders to understand how they can drive innovation to change their companies and to change the world. One of the things that impresses me so much about Rosabeth is that while her sphere is academia, her tendency is towards action. And so the clarion call towards action for business leaders is a common theme in Rosabeth's writing and in her teaching. And so for those of us that have been fortunate enough to have had her as a teacher, I think all of us, it makes us want to get into the game and take action and change the world in the way that Rosabeth has helped us to understand the world needs change. And there's so much about Rosabeth's latest initiatives, and I'm not necessarily talking about the book here, because I think the book tells stories about the actions that have been taken as a result of Rosabeth's leadership. And so I have a question for you to kick things off, and maybe in doing so, you can also, if you want to just talk a little bit about your background if people don't know it, but the creation of the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard, for those of us that know Harvard, it was such a groundbreaking move. What inspired you to do it?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. And I will get to that question in a minute, but first I have to thank you also for Shorelight, because Shorelight is definitely an outside the building idea, and you're trying to transform certain aspects of higher education and do it with a sense of purpose and also practicality, which is very important, because I say in the book that I think even social impact ventures with a strong social purpose need a revenue model. Yes. I mean, we don't discount money, but higher education is ripe for reinvention. So I'm going to get to the Harvard ALI answer. It's ripe for reinvention because any system whose basic structures were laid down in the 14th century needs to be rethought, reinvented. Even if the buildings are modern, the mindset, the structures tend not to be. And so I had a couple of colleagues. We were all at Harvard Business School, but we thought much more broadly about the whole university. One of them is now Dean of Harvard College, Rakesh Khurana. The other one is Dean of Harvard Business School, Nitin Noria. And we were good friends, and we kept talking about change, about the university needing to become more relevant to society and not be an ivory tower, and yet also not be purely vocational, although I totally believe in giving people actual skills they can put to work and earn a living. And sometimes I think liberal arts should come later, after you have experience and can actually absorb great ideas and think about what they mean. So we talked about the relevance of the university. I was concerned at that time about problem solving, all these problems in the world that seem to be getting worse, or at least not getting better fast. One of them I talked about and I mentioned in the book is pandemics. Someone said, you're so prescient, because I say they can fly to your area on an airplane. The world cannot keep diseases isolated. Well, I was thinking about earlier outbreaks. I'm not that prescient. And then our third thought was, what about the fact that, in fact, one of the accomplishments of the last century is that people live longer. Longevity is a huge accomplishment in many parts of the world. However, huge disparities, but longevity. And so yet we have another system, often called retirement. I never say that out loud. I hate the R word. Most people don't retire, they transition. They do many things in life, but people have 20, 30 productive years often after the time their company kicks them out or the government kicks them out. In Singapore, I think it's still age 60, which meant, or maybe it was the other way around, maybe it was Japan age 60, which meant that Singapore, for their new biotech initiatives, could hire some of the best scientists in Japan because they were out of jobs in Japan, and Singapore knew that they still had time. So we put those three ideas together and said, hey, let's invent a new stage of higher education. Okay, well, somebody has to start somewhere. It was a little audacious, and I would start saying that, and people would say, well, could you pin it down a little? And our idea was a literal new stage of higher education that is not an executive program, not a part-time, not a short, not confined to one part of the university, but a university-wide stage of higher education where people could spend a year, and we did everything a little differently, calendar year, not an academic year, because that's how adults live their lives. And that summer in between was really important for what people learn. Internships, field experiences, research, they would hire students. And we also thought of the intergenerational implications that students, regular students, degree students, or Shorelight coming for their freshman year students would benefit from having connections with people who had reached, who had achieved, reached high statuses in their careers. So we invented it. And there was a little, like all the examples I talk about in the book. By the way, the book is not about this, yet everything that we used, our theories, our way of thinking, we went through everything the people are going through who are trying to start social impact ventures. So skepticism at first, you know, way too big, you couldn't do it, we don't want it, but we did it. We start, and in the beginning, how do you sell people on an idea nobody's ever seen before? You went through that at Shorelight. So you start small. You start with whoever you can get, and we were, for the first year, we wanted a few more to start with, but we said we're going to start no matter what. And then the idea kept growing, and now a number of other universities around the world are doing it. And I keep thinking about how much I want to champion that and build a movement, but the movement is happening on its own. And I think it has the chance not just to transform higher education, but also to be a model of how you build a new leadership force for the world, because that was the other goal, a new leadership force. So all these people who have a lot to contribute, let's mobilize them.
You know, I've heard people say about your work and about the teachings of this book that it has the power to change the world. Donna Shalala said that, you know, former president of University of Miami, among many other things.
Yeah, she's in Congress now.
Yes.
And had been U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services. So we need her wisdom right this moment.
We sure do. So how do advanced leaders drive innovation that can change the world?
So, you know, I've been thinking about this with respect to the current epidemic, and I was really excited to hear that your message to Shorelight in part is stay connected with one another, even if working remotely, because there's lots of possible ideas for how one better handles a crisis. And they, again, start small, but they can spread and become the norm. One example I use in my book is, it's a US example, but it was borrowed from Scandinavia, which had done it first. It's the designated driver campaign, which has now spread to many other parts of the world, which is to reduce deaths from intoxicated drivers. The innovator did a campaign to sell the idea of a new social role, designated driver. And he managed to partner with all kinds of media places. He knocked on doors where he knew nobody in Hollywood. He just met people. He asked people to introduce him. He talked up ideas and managed to get the media to feature designated drivers in their programs. So suddenly millions and millions of people were exposed to that idea. And it was particularly good for teenagers, although good for adults too, because it started becoming a social expectation. Who's the designated driver here? And it became something positive. It became like a leadership role. And so I keep thinking there are many other opportunities to do a campaign, change hearts and minds. And when you do a campaign and you get a new social expectation, you can also sometimes get laws changed. Laws by themselves don't necessarily change behavior. And between laws and behavior, you also need demonstrations, programs about what's possible. One of them that I'm particularly fond of at the moment has to do with improving the health of African-American males who don't like the health system, don't like hospitals. And where do they gather? Well, the barbershops. And so this program is teaching barbers to take blood pressure screenings and other health indicators so they can send people to hospitals. Or health partners, that's clearly outside the building. You find a gap. I have a climate change guy. Now that's an issue that the world cares about, particularly younger people really care about climate change, the #1 issue worldwide on global surveys. And somebody who realized that there are a lot of potential, he cares about the oceans, and there's a lot of potential for action, but there's no financing mechanism. And so he brought a finance and economic lens to the issue of the oceans and all the technology that could be used to improve the state of the oceans, whether sensors or other technology. And he started going to lots of meetings. He created an entity because you have to sound bigger than you are. And so he had an entity. He went to lots and lots of international meetings everywhere in the world. And he was always there. Sometimes he had to beg to get in, but soon, because he offered to help, people liked having him there. And after he made these relationships, he started talking up an economic perspective. And for some of the NGOs, the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, other NGOs, the idea of business, that was the enemy. Those were the ones who had destroyed this. He learned from them about biology, ecology, et cetera, and gradually they were willing to listen to him. He was a banker, and suddenly they saw he's not the enemy, and then they were willing to talk to other bankers. And his entity, he thinks, is a platform for building a World Bank for oceans, which is about as big as you can get. And it's just one guy. So I believe that people who care and are connected and can mobilize, I believe students today want that too, by the way. Students want to have social purpose. They want to take jobs with social purpose. They want to have social purpose on campus. That may be a tremendous opportunity I haven't figured out how to capitalize on yet, but maybe you all will, for not just internships that involve service, but imagine what would happen. You have lots of international students. What would happen if they're mobilized in communities where there are people who came from their country and they're doing service and they're learning and they're getting great sociology or economics in the course of doing that, what happens when they go back to their countries? They could also be a powerful leadership force for the world.
You just really led into my next question. So for maybe not everybody knows that the Advanced Leadership Initiative would serve a population that I think one would say is a highly accomplished population of leaders, people who have accomplished extraordinary things in their lives and then are channeling some of that talent and energy and vision towards societal impact.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many people who work at Shorelight, whether they're some employees or even our students, who are just as passionate, but they haven't had that work experience or life experience or the credentials. How do we all become leaders and agents of change?
I mean, great question. And of course we can. I mean, I start out with optimism. Even in a difficult time, I call it the optimism of activism, that when you're active and try to work on a problem, your sense of purpose carries you through even difficult times. So yes, at Harvard, we started out deliberately a little elitist because this is an American thing, you know, an aspirational culture. Everybody wants to be Bill Gates. I always wanted to be Bill Gates's mother. I thought that I met her. I thought she was wonderful a long time ago. I thought that would be a good place to be. But we're aspirational. And so we like seeing what the well-known and famous are doing. So we were deliberately wanting top people. And we had them, including a former astronaut who had to leave the first year in the middle because he was becoming head of NASA. Pretty cool. That was the best withdrawal I ever had in my life. So yes, they have connections, they have a lot of capabilities, but they also have to partner. And who do they partner with? It might be your employees, it might be the students. They can't do it alone, nobody does it alone. So that's one of the first lessons. And often people who are so accomplished are trained out of being able to think differently. They can't get out of the building, they're sort of stuck in the building. They're stuck in the mindset of their profession and they try to apply it where it doesn't fit. So I tend to like the enthusiasm, fresh ideas, energy of younger generations who have a lot to offer, but younger generations then need the experienced people. So we need more mechanisms for getting people together and for offering opportunities to do things together. Then secondly, I think you do start locally. You don't have to, I mean, even if you're going to take on, as my ocean sky did, boiling the ocean, the impossible, or actually he was trying to stop it from boiling. You start locally and your local demonstration can suddenly become, not suddenly, but can become a global model. You start with something that other people say, hey, what a great idea. Like I like the barbershop project for that reason, because lots of other people could say, hey, we have barbershops, we have people who are underserved. We could do something about that right now. And then you start your small local and you might be doing it after work. You might be doing it in brown bag lunches with some of your friends at work. You may be talking it over, but you do your small local and then you create the International Association of Barbershop Health Projects. So you can go from small to very big pretty quickly by creating campaigns that other people can join other places. So most social movements start that way. And you do want a local demonstration. I mean, I've been almost forever on the board of the group that has brought national service to America and also South Africa and also the UK. And for a while, we thought we would bring national service to every country in the world. In fact, when I travel and sit on, which I may not do for a while, but I've been on programs where I've been with prime ministers of countries, and I've been with top officials and the media, and you get asked these absurd questions like, how could I answer this question? Absurd questions like, what should Colombia do? What should Japan do? What should South Korea do? And if you have to say one thing, which is also impossible, by the way, but the one thing I say is national service. Nothing like mobilizing young people in diverse teams to go out and try to solve a community problem. And so I love national service. Well, that started with two guys in Boston who their first demonstration was a cute little summer program in which in the summer they lined up people who were willing to do service projects. And then they had a full-time program for a year. And then they were lucky. I mean, they were connected to other people also thinking these ideas, but then they were lucky because one year they invited every presidential candidate to come visit their program. They were a little program in one local place. And because candidates in the US, for those of you who are not US, you probably have noticed candidates all come to New Hampshire early voting. And so they were all coming through Boston. And they were turned down by every single candidate except one, Bill Clinton, who became president. And one of the first things he did was establish national service, so change the laws. And now this program works in schools and school systems pay for it because the core members serve the students so well. And that's another kind of innovation that's institution changing. And I love that story. I mean, you can be very small and you just persist, issue invitations, get them to come to speak at your Shorelight office or whatever. There are so many ways. And so the book is full of how you can do it, even if you're not Bill Clinton or a president of your country.
So you were one of the pioneers at Harvard Business School in the creation of the Social Enterprise Initiative, the creation of the business leadership and the social sector curriculum. And now I think it is commonplace for people to think about businesses that can be very successful and that have double bottom lines or triple bottom lines, but it wasn't always that way. So for us here at Shorelight, as you know, because we've discussed it, and in some ways, the creation of Shorelight is not disconnected from all the learnings that I had through you. I think that for some of us, it's a challenge to think about the both and of running a successful business and making a difference. And just, it's a little bit of a long question, but then, but I want to make sure I get it out there right, that we really and truly make a difference for students. We have just about 10,000 who have gone through our programs. 90% of them have progressed successfully to the second year. We've got the potential for huge impact for students, for universities, for how we operate inside the organization and treat our employees. At times I feel that it's hard for people when they come into the organization and they are so attracted by the mission that when we also need to manage the business side of things, make numbers, grow the business, be responsible about costs, all so that we can continue to achieve the great things that we've achieved. I think for some it's a challenge or it feels hypocritical. Hey, I thought we were all about mission. And we want to be clear that we're about mission and margin, but it hasn't been easy. And it would be wonderful just to get some insight from one of the pioneers of this way of thinking for businesses around the globe as to how we might think about it.
Thank you, Tom. And by the way, you've said so many flattering things. I really want to thank you for that because I'm just one person and have been lucky to be parts of movements. And of course, I now have to think about what's my next movement. I hope the book spreads. I hope all the people who are watching will post, tweet, do social media things, take pictures off the screen, whatever, because we've got to spread the word. I think those two things certainly can go together. I mean, this book is very sector agnostic, like for-profit, not-for-profit, a mixture. There are things that are a mixture of all of those things. So the purpose side, the mission side is about impact. And as long as you're continuing to think about the lives touched and what happens to those lives touched, you're staying on mission. You can't afford to continue to touch those lives without a source of capital. I say revenue. I do think that more social enterprises and even enterprises, startups should have a revenue model. We have some great nonprofits out there called Uber and Lyft. They were not intended, they are supposedly formally for profit, but they haven't made profits because they haven't focused on how they deliver value and exactly where the revenue is going to come from, in part because they thought too narrowly, actually. So how you balance those, first of all, you can't necessarily balance them every minute of your life. One of the things we know about balance is that it's over a longer term, whether it's work and life balance. I know that there are some times when we have to work all the time and it consumes everything, and other times when we can take more time for the rest of life. So that's one thing to remember. It's not every minute. The second thing to remember is that the mission stays forward at every meeting. I learned this from a really terrific person who was part of our early founding group and has done a lot to transform healthcare. That if you start most meetings reminding one another about the mission, you won't fall into the immediate trade-off trap. And then you ask yourself about trade-offs. Is it worth it? Is the revenue coming in through that source worth jeopardizing our mission? Is our mission and staying pure worth jeopardizing our revenue stream? I was really impressed, and I mention it briefly. I do a shout out in the book. Procter & Gamble, a company I've known very well, Procter & Gamble had a product, a water purification tablet. They had bought it actually, and it was miraculous. You could take muddy river water and in 20 minutes have clean drinking water. Really important for many parts of the world because we know dirty water has huge health implications, including whether kids can go to school. And there are lots of reasons, weren't making sufficient money on it. It was hard to sell. We don't have the time to go through the reasons, but you'll see some reasons in the book. And the question came, given that other divisions of Procter & Gamble needed investment, why were they continuing to invest in this water purification tablet? And the people at the top at the time were torn because the investment was important to keep growing the other parts of the company. And yet they believed in this, and their mission was improving lives. So what they ended up doing was setting up a not-for-profit to which they could donate this, still make it, sell it at break even, so they got their costs covered. And that not-for-profit partnered with many other major NGOs, including the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta in the US, much in the news today. And they could continue to sell it. And it was there after a crisis. They ended up giving it away for free after some of the tsunamis in Asia. And that was an interesting outside the building thought. Why does everything have to have one form? As Shorelight grows, it could be that Shorelight will continue to be a very successful investor-owned company, and yet might also have some for-profit connected partners. There's nothing to say that we can't think much more innovatively about how the sectors work together and how we manage both profits and purpose at the same time, but not necessarily at the same minute.
A Shorelight related question, but I think hopefully it has some relevance to the book. So we've had a core business for years, as you know, and primarily that's been bringing international students physically to our US university campuses. Some years ago, we started up Shorelight Live, which would allow us to do the other side of the commitment that we made when we started the company, which was to bring US universities to the students where they live and work. I think for us internally, there were times where it felt like there was a tension. You know, we've got the vast majority of our revenue and effort going towards serving these students on campus. Why are we spending money and time on this other thing? You know, is it taking away from what we're trying to do? There were maybe some tensions internally around it. You know, for us, we felt like we had to invest in innovation. We certainly didn't know all the things that the future would hold. Now, in the current situation, we're in a position where through Shorelight Live, we can offer solutions to our own universities and their international students, as well as other universities and their international students, maybe even domestic students if we want to go that far. So we feel very fortunate that we have the assets to deploy because of that willingness to invest in innovation. But it's been hard for us. And I wonder, are we unique or is that similar, that tension internally?
So what a wonderful question. And because I teach that, naturally I'm here to want to talk about think outside the building. But within every building, there's a tension between the new and the ongoing. And there's often a cultural tension. So the people in the mainstream will say, we make the money, they're having all the fun. You know, we have targets.
Nobody ever said that here at Shorelight.
Oh, sure. People say, how long did you study us? Because I will come out with these things and they say, but you must have studied us. Well, there's always that tension. And the people who are supposedly having the fun feel they can go wild, and they sometimes can look down on the people who are grinding out the routine business. So that's a common kind of tension. And it can really get in the way, but you need both. You need the ongoing and you need to keep enriching it. So first of all, it is important that the ongoing business also innovate and get rewarded for innovation, and like prizes, contests, and fun. So they're having some of the fun too, and they get some of the investment back to enrich their business. I'm not here to consult on Shorelight's strategy, but as we're talking, I'm having a million ideas for what else. You're probably already thinking about this. What else Shorelight does for your higher education customers as you bring students, because I know you're doing some of that. And for those in what I call the new stream, that is the innovation units, first of all, they have to stop being so arrogant. We're the future, and we know these esoteric things that nobody else knows because we're using groovy technology. Because your whole point is you're supposed to let that technology be accessible to everybody. And I think one way is to mix and match people, to have people rotate across the units and have everybody explicitly know that they're an ambassador to the rest of the company. And then to keep the one enterprise sense of purpose. We're all here because of a common purpose toward common goals. And these are two routes, but in fact, as you grow, you're going to find more routes to get to where you want to go. Because if your ultimate goal is impact on students all around the world to greatly improve the state of higher education and to eliminate education shortfalls, you also, of course, will be thinking about what those 10,000, was it 10,000 alumni
They're
are
actually
going to do.
on our campuses right now.
And how they are mobilized, because what's their responsibility back to their home country with the sense of purpose that Shorelight has, is because if you're sending them back to their home countries just so they become the rich elite that oppresses everybody else, I don't think that's what you want to do. So you've got to start thinking about alumni and how you connect them to one another, because they're part of a movement too, having the privilege of having this transition into a U.S. education. So there's a lot of things you can think about, and that tension between the new and the old, I mean, it can be resolved. It is classic, but being explicit about it and understanding it and discussing it and how we overcome it is about the best way to do anything.
So last question for me before we open it up. I think that we all want to be thinking outside the building, especially in these uncertain times. Anything that we should continue to keep in mind as we sort of move through this unique period, and sort of, well, one of the things that I want everyone at Shorelight to know is, as we pride ourselves on being innovative, we aren't afraid to fail, we encourage taking action, and if we make mistakes, we'll adjust. But what are some things that as people read the book, or having already read the book, then can take from the book that will help them really drive towards that innovative thinking?
So there are several things at various levels. So one is the general premise that I talk about early in the book, that any action is better than none, that being aware of problems and taking any action is a good thing to do, that passivity, being passive, is depressing, and also that negativity can easily drive out positivity. And by the way, positivity is an actual word. In the Oxford English Dictionary, it preceded negativity by over 100 years. So we've always known you can be positive, but it often takes 5 positives to cancel out a negative. So you have to stay really positive. And you have to think about things as learning opportunities, or you have to say to yourself, I'll get through it. So that's one general thing. And also I have a whole chapter devoted to what I call Kanter's Law. Everybody should have a law named after them, even if you have to name it yourself. So Kanter's Law is that everything can look like a failure in the middle. If you give up at the first sign of obstacles and roadblocks, by definition, it's a failure. If you keep going, you persist, you pivot, you try something a little different, you check in, is your purpose still valid? You check in with your allies and partners. Do you still have their support? You can get through it. And that's really important. I actually have a story. I know people will think this is prescient too. At the beginning of the next chapter about scaling, about a venture to bring affordable alternative energy to Liberia, which is solar cells, and very, very important. I won't explain all of that now, but they were hit by nearly every problem you could imagine. These were American lawyers who decided to do this, but they had people on the ground working with them in Liberia. I'm sure there are many parallels to Shorelight. And first thing, the solar cells arrived from China and none of them worked. So they mobilized street kids who were working underneath cars on one major street, who fixed the solar cells. So they turned to local assets. They turned to the community itself to help get them through. Then they had an embezzlement, a very relationship-oriented culture. So people were hiring relatives who were not always screened for ethics, and they got through that. But then they had an Ebola outbreak. And what they did in that outbreak is they were great to their employees and they were quarantined for a month. They sent people home with 2 months' pay and really cared about them. And because of that, big companies started approaching them to invest and wanting their products. So you don't know what will happen if you keep going, but you keep going in the same way that you try to run your company and your life in the first place. So that's 2 of the lessons about getting through tough times. And then collaboration, how you build coalitions, how you convince people to join you, because you don't do it alone. Leaders need to enlist and engage and empower other people so that they work together. I just tweeted that actually. And when you do that, you not only enlarge what you do, but then you can't let them down. But the way you do it is you have to know their dreams in order to get them to sign up for yours. So there's a lot of tips on how you persuade when you don't have formal power. And I think that's the way we all live right now. Hierarchy is less important. Hustle is more important. Persuasion over position. And so I have a lot of skills that I think can be helpful regardless of where you are in life.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think we do have some questions coming in. And so if we can just find out what those are, we'll ask them to Professor Kanter.
Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So we have some questions from everyone out that's watching remotely. Tom talked about mentoring. How important is internal mentoring? And can you tell us about your first mentor and who you're mentoring now?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, I think it's great that Shorelight emphasizes mentoring. I think that's really important. So I've been kicking around a while. I never say how long, because my best friends are emerging. And I mean, Tom, you're already getting a little at the high end of no, you're still no matter what. But when I was starting out my career, I can't say I had a lot of people who mentored me or who helped me. I was often the only woman. I was a little different. I learned a lot from that. I stumbled upon people who were willing to help, but because of how good my work was. So I was always determined to help women and help people who were having trouble breaking in otherwise closed groups. I think that metaphor of thinking outside the building, it's thinking outside of closed circles. So who my first mentor, I don't know. You know, we always like to say our parents. I don't know. My parents thought I was weird. I think. No, my mother used to say they were great. I adored my parents. I loved my parents. But my mother would say, I don't understand you quite, because I was on territory that people hadn't been on. And now there are a lot of people like me. So I have to keep inventing new things so I get any attention at all. I do think it's very important. And the way, I mean, I wrote about mentoring and sponsoring early in an earlier book. And there is a difference. Mentoring, you're helping people. Sponsorship, though, is often what people need. They need somebody who speaks for them in meetings they don't attend. And I found that by trying to be helpful to people and just hanging in, not being discouraged. I had many, many discouraging moments. I had people thinking I was going to drop out here and there. I had people who were negative about things. And you have to believe and keep on going. And then if you accumulate some successes, that helps you keep on going. So I had enough tenacity to do that without a lot of help. But I had some people who did help. They weren't always the people I got advice from. And thinking about that distinction, I think, can be helpful to people. Advice is often from peers. They're often the best source of advice. But sponsorship, you need somebody who goes where you don't go, that can speak up for you, and they have to believe in your work. So I believe that people have to show their work to others. And who do I mentor or sponsor? I do sponsor people. I've had people that have worked for me. I have friends like Tom, and I'm constantly talking them up. And that, even if it's indirect, helps them. I'm constantly available to people, some people for conversations. So we have conversations. You don't need me anymore, I don't think. I have conversations with the founders of the National Service Organization, but they don't need me anymore. But there are new ones coming along. I have two entrepreneurs in particular in startup ventures that I advise. One I invested in, the other I haven't yet invested in, because my advice has to be taken. Because I think I'm right about what the roadblocks are. So I care about people who have a social purpose and want to achieve a lot. Again, it could be a for-profit and they also want to make a lot of money. But they have new ideas, innovative ideas, and those are the ones that I tend to gravitate toward.
And for all of those of us who have been mentored by Rosabeth, we absolutely still need you. And one of the reasons is because I think what Rosabeth has done has while there are so many timeless things that Rosabeth has written, she also is on to the new and the next. And I think that's, some of us don't necessarily see those things, and we get so focused on our own businesses, we're not always lifting up and looking at the next and staying as sort of on the bleeding edge as we could.
But thank you, but that's what I need you for. That's what I need the people who approach me for, because I learn from them. And it's a little bit like my oceans guy. I mean, I don't go to them first and say, I'm going to learn from you. But my students, every year, there's generally at least one that I remain in very close touch with, and I learn a lot from them. And I read a lot, by the way. Reading is often an underrated thing to do.
Great, I have a couple more. You have mentioned some leadership skill sets. You have mentioned some leadership skill sets you see as critical for executive leadership. How does a company work to help develop those skills for their employees?
Ah, what a wonderful question. I have a slight bias, and so rather than go through all the ways one could do it, I'll tell you my slight bias. I mentioned the optimism of activism and doing. I believe in developing leaders through doing, and not necessarily through courses or classes, although I believe they can be important. In fact, if you were going to do a course or class, use my book and have a book club and sit around and discuss a book. I believe there's often more wisdom in the room than we give people credit for. And I believe in leadership development through action. I do mention this in the book, I worked with IBM when they were beginning a new, more advanced leadership development approach. And they created a corporate service corps. And they took high talent, potential higher leaders. They took them away from their job for a good month and sent them in diverse teams to other parts of the world to solve a problem using technology tools, because that's what the company did, but you could use whatever a company does. And there was no commercial interest in that place by IBM. They were often doing things for the public sector or doing things in countries IBM was years away from going into. Early on, Vietnam had some corporate service corps teams. This was so wildly successful that higher level executives wanted that opportunity too. And it was a hard sell in the beginning because bosses didn't like losing their most talented employees for that amount of time. But what it did was, it was cultivating skills by doing something to solve a problem. Very much the outside the building approach I take. You want to solve a larger problem. Also, people built a network of relationships among people they would not have known. And relationships are key to leading, because then you do have somebody you can count on for advice or mentoring or for feedback, because peer groups are sometimes unforgiving. If people are a little autocratic, the peer group will isolate you pretty fast. So they then got other companies to do it. They would have liked more companies to do it. I still think more companies should do it, but they got other famous global companies to do it. They invited them to join the program. So I believe that whatever kind of leadership development you do, it needs to include projects and action. I've worked for other companies, big companies, that have at least had for their leadership development programs a project. Everybody, the other thing is, when you have a project, you have a common focus and you bring lots of different skills to that focus.
Great. Another question. Innovation and disruption is in Shorelight's DNA, and we can feel it on a daily basis. But as we've gone from 30 employees in 2014 to more than 600 today, internal disruption and innovation can sometimes feel so much harder than it was when we were smaller. Are there any fundamental principles we should keep in mind as we continue to disrupt ourselves at this stage of business and do right by students, employees, and Shorelight?
Shall I just plunge in? I mean, disrupt is a very strong word that sometimes, and of course, one of my colleagues, late colleagues at Harvard Business School, is famous for writing about it. And I'll use it, I'll toss it around from time to time. But disrupt is kind of negative if you think about it. And no wonder people get concerned and there's uncertainties and anxieties, because those who are doing the disruptor, I talked about that earlier with the new versus the old, sometimes run roughshod over people who need a little more time to get used to an idea. So one thing I think is that we have to introduce change at a variety of different paces. And you often have to let people experience the new and the old together, and use their old email system and while they're phasing in the new ones, and not do change abruptly is one thing. Secondly, I think the more people can feel a sense of common membership. And another idea I like that some companies have done is that you have your job and you have your work teams that you work with, but you all also are members of something in your geography. And there are activities you do together in your geography. So you feel a larger sense of connection, and you know lots of people in other units, because as you go from 30 to 650, which still you could fit all in one room, but still you don't know everybody and what they're doing and in other units. And the more that you can build dense networks, and you don't have to take a lot of time doing it, but I think that's really important for growth. And we all need to identify at various levels. We need to identify with people like us. For me, other women, it was important to me early on that even if I was the only woman in my organization, that I had other women in the community in similar positions we could get together. You need to feel a member of your work team with the goal of whatever the job is. And then you need to feel a member of your local unit and know people there. And you need to feel a member of the larger entity and feel some pride in it. So we need to think about membership at many different levels, especially when you're really big.
So I might just end with one last question, because it's so important for present day. It doesn't have to be related to Shorelight, but there are some things related to Shorelight. We're in a particularly uncertain time now. There are so many things in the book that I believe people can use as tools for navigating these times. How should we think about leveraging those tools, especially with respect to the coronavirus and all of the unknowns and the things that I think the contagion of a virus and the contagion of fear and all of those things that contribute to an environment where people don't know exactly what to do. And our goal is to be a steady hand. We think we can be in all of this, and we know we've got assets that we can deploy in ways that can really provide solutions. But whether it's for our business or just for the business community during this time, how do we leverage the learnings of the book to help us navigate?
So the light in your name is a wonderful fortuitous thing, because you can be a light to the world and light the way for other people too. So, well, naturally, I'm interested in having my book used, and book clubs and invitations to talk and conversations are very important. I think it is getting small actions that are doable right now, and then anticipating after, because this isn't going to last forever. We don't know when it peaks. We don't know, But we do know there are going to be a lot of distressed people who are feeling socially isolated. We know that. We do know that there are economic repercussions. And I think that one positive thing to do is to begin convening discussions now about what one can do afterwards, and look for as many creative ideas as possible, and look for analogies in other companies, and invite your partners to join you. And that can be several kinds of partners. It can be your suppliers of even your pens that you're holding right now. It can be your university partners. It can be the lawyers around you, and convene them for conversations about how do we think more broadly, because the temptation, of course, is to go well inside the building. We're actually told that now. We're told to self-isolate. So, you know, metaphorically, I mentioned these times when people are so distressed, they go inside the building, pull down the shades, don't talk to anybody else, and of course, nothing gets done and the problem gets worse. This is exactly the time to go outside. And if you can't go outside literally because you're told to stay home, well, you can go out on the street and maybe see a few people at a time. But you go outside by reaching out and by creating virtual conversations and virtual events of a different kind, which is, what can we do to keep people's spirits up? And your students especially, those you have to care about, they're more vulnerable for so many reasons because of all the differences from where they are and their parents at home. I don't know what you do with your great technology to help the students communicate to their parents. I don't know whether you convene virtual gatherings of the parents so that they can talk to their students. It seems to me there's lots of ideas if we begin the conversation now.
Well, I think we all aspire to be advanced leaders who can develop innovations that can help change the world in positive ways. Thanks for providing a roadmap for the business community and beyond, and for being willing to personalize it for our organization. We're really honored to have had you here.
Thank you, Tom. I'm incredibly honored. I'm so glad you're also just down the road so we can do this in person.
Yes.
But I'm very honored because I know about your values, and I know about how committed you are to having Shorelight and all the people who work at Shorelight be the best you can be.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. Take care. Good night, good afternoon, good morning. Bye-bye.